But let's talk about the other thing that's going on, because I think you're right. I think they got completely blindsided by Omicron.
Yeah.
I think they thought that the vaccine was basically going to get things done. They attempted the vaccine mandate that got reversed, but largely I think it was successful because it was instituted, it created the right pressures to get people vaccinated at that time. But there's like almost like three tiers of this, right? Like there's the full-on anti-vaxxers, the sort of like Republican right-wing COVID deniers, and then there's this sort of like libertarian strain of denial that is trying to get everybody back to normal and out of this autocratic boot on our necks that is keeping normalcy. And you wrote a great piece on this, which basically said, like, there's no foot in that boot. In fact, there's no boot.
Yeah.
Walk through this, because this, and like that last cohort of people are really libertarian in some way, because they're looking for some return to normalcy, it seems to me, because they don't want government action to support a non-normal situation, but it's also just sort of bizarre.
Yeah, and so we just finished taping interviews for a forthcoming episode of our podcast, Politics of Everything, about Boris Johnson and his scandal in the UK. And we were talking to people in England, and one guest said something that was like, as I'm sure you are also used to there, we haven't been able to gather with family for some time. And I would encourage Americans to go look at what the restrictions, the government-imposed restrictions, have been in Conservative Party-run England over the last several years, because that is what actual restrictions on behavior look like. For a long time, they weren't allowed to go outside after like 10 p.m. They weren't allowed to gather in groups larger than 5 or 6. And the authorities were enforcing them. Police were stopping cars to check where you were traveling and things like that. And to go back to what I wrote about, I'd sort of just described, first of all, my week, basically, in which my kid had gone to pre-K. We had a birthday party in the park. My mother visited for his birthday last week. And all of this happened in the background of thousands and thousands of Americans dying every day from COVID-19. And my essential point was that there aren't restrictions on behavior. I can go to I could go to a bar right now. I could go to a restaurant right now. And this is in New York, which had some of the stricter lockdown rules earlier in the pandemic. And sort of what people are debating and what they're complaining about is school closures to a large extent. But schools are closing mostly when people get sick. People get sick and they can't go to work, and then schools close. And I don't mean to diminish how difficult school closures are, because I know they have been impossible for a lot of parents to manage, especially working class parents. But working class and often Black parents are the ones who have been most in favor, of COVID mitigation and remote learning and virtual learning. Like, polls have consistently shown that. So I was sort of trying to sort of get around the more tedious part of that debate, but also just to sort of emphasize to Americans that, like, the government is not currently telling you can't do things, especially like once you get the vaccine. And to the extent that the mandate was the so-called vaccine mandate that the Biden administration pushed was supposedly, it wasn't really a vaccine mandate. It was a testing mandate, which you could opt out of. Mm-hmm. My experience has been exactly like yours. To the extent that I see, like, restaurants having problems or this and that, it is not because the government has in any way inhibited people from going to the restaurant. It's that concern about COVID has, and it's like there's this cohort of people out there. Matt just sent me Nate Silver's tweet. Let's put it up blind, because I'm sure it's going to be indicative of this. Look, I think,
open table restaurant.
Oh yeah, this is it. Yeah, in Miami they were up 14% compared with January of 2019, but other places they were down dramatically. And I guess the argument is that somehow there's more restrictions there. No, I think what it is that there are people in those areas, in those blue areas, who are taking it more seriously. I would also bet on some level, I mean, it has to do with, like, in Manhattan, for instance, I'm looking at that down 64%. It's because you had really wealthy people going to their places in the East Hamptons or going to Colorado.
Palm Beach. Yeah.
Maybe that's why they're up in Florida, is because they want to be outside more. I would also imagine there's more outside dining in Miami.
It would be nicer to be outdoor dining in Miami right now than it would here.
Absolutely. I mean, to think that that's not a part of this equation, it is much, much safer to eat outside than it is inside. And the other thing is that I find astonishing about this is that, as a parent, that the idea that you could, in some way, even if statistically, the odds are low, and I'm not saying that they necessarily are, frankly, particularly with Omicron, of your kid getting seriously ill from anything that you did or didn't do, the stakes are so much higher, even if the statistics aren't there. And so it inhibits your behavior. Yeah. And that is a perfectly rational, and I would think on some level, an attribute that we want from parents. Be somewhat overly protective of your kids in light of, not knowing what long COVID is, how it's going to implicate kids years down the road. I mean, I can see that. I mean, I can see why people would, I wouldn't necessarily have been the first person in line with my 8-year-old to get vaccinated. After a couple of million people get vaccinated, all right, I feel a little more comfortable about it. But I mean, so I can understand, like that, some measure of concern to do anything with your kid. I mean,
my kid just turned 5, right? So he only just became vaccine eligible. And there are things that I think we have been not as cautious as some people, but we've been reasonably cautious. But there are things we weren't doing until we could get the vaccine for him. And I have to imagine, like, that's not a sign when other people are doing that. It's not irrational, and it's not because they are in love with lockdown, right? And that's sort of the language that I find sort of most off-putting, because I don't know anyone for whom that's true. I know people who are being cautious according to their own calculations of their safety based on their best understanding of public health. And we need better public health communication, certainly, in addition to all sorts of other kinds of support. But, I'm not doing the sort of up until he's fully immune. Like, we're not doing the sort of travel we would have been doing in a normal year. And that's just because of the reality of the world. Also, when we took him to get his shot, he was very, very worried about getting vaccinated. And he said, instead of getting the vaccine, can I just get a shot? And we said, yes, you can. If you want to, you can just get a shot.
No, he's gonna hold that against you when he finds out. I mean, my son was, and it certainly wasn't coming from us. He was very relieved to get the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I agree with you. Like, the idea of like somebody's in love with the lockdown is just a bizarre construct. And it's almost as if, I mean, the analogy I would make is that like, if in the course of doing everything I can to protect my children within what I deem to be reasonable, and everybody has their own, like you say, everybody has their own sort of like comfort zone with that. And I as a matter of policy, I think people should do that. I might, be sitting and talking on the phone with somebody and say, like, I can't believe they're doing this or that. But as a matter of policy, in terms of the public, but we do what's within reason, and then maybe we do stuff that we're willing to accept that risk. And that's what makes us feel comfortable. It's as if these people want to do stuff and want to not have to account for the deaths or whatever's happening,
or feel like a bad parent because
but they're not parents,
right?
Like that's the thing. It's like the people who are espousing this generally are not parents. It's as if they have this like, I want to be able to say this stuff and not have it have myself feel guilty as I see thousands of people a day dying. It's just
and that's why the unmask our children thing is so much of that is projection too, right?
Totally.
It's because they want to go to bars, they want to do whatever they want to do, and they don't want to feel like they want to be protected from any guilt that happens from that. And that is
I think it's totally normal to just have a very powerful feeling of I want everything to go back to the way it was. I often feel that way. I would like everything to just go back to the way it was. And I think what these people we're talking about have done is they've turned that feeling and they've taken that feeling and they turned it into someone else's fault. You know, like they've said everyone else has decided not to allow things to be the way they were. And that's just not really the fact.
But this is also it seems to me, very much related to the whole cancel culture argument, which is why I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of these people are the same people who are talking about this stuff, because it is a resent that they are not getting permission to have the world to perceive the world as if they need permission from everybody else because they want to be released from any type of accountability for their perspective. And so they're projecting onto others that you're inhibiting my feeling of free of freedom. And my freedom is not just freedom in terms of like what I can do or what I can say, but freedom from any type of doubt creeping in. And for years, my argument about what Rush Limbaugh did more than anything else for the conservative mind was to say, and he would explicitly say this at different stages in his career, do not doubt yourself. Do not doubt yourself. It was all about any creeping doubt that would come in is to be expelled. And that's what these people are arguing for. Do not make me feel any doubt about this.
And that's, It's a powerful and attractive thing. And I think like we've seen its success on the right and the center right. Like it's liberatory.
And it's very much libertarian on some level too, because if the other option is, hey, we need to accept that the virus exists. And how do we respond to this in such a way that is going to minimize immiseration for people? Government needs to spend a tremendous amount of money to allow people to stay at home, to pay for mechanisms in which to take care of kids, to increase, you're
worried about the restaurants? Give them aid.
Exactly.
You're worried about the restaurants? Give them aid, Nate Silver.
And you're worried about children's ability to socialize and whatnot. Put high powered ventilators into, or I should say, what do you call it? The ventilation into schools, like fit the schools to make them even more safe. Yeah. If you're that worried about it, there should be filters in every classroom. Really good filters, multiple filters. You should be able to, spend the money. It would be an incredibly expensive project, but apparently,
this is the sad thing is that we sent a bunch of money out to do that, but with no mechanism to say this is how the money should be spent, and no ability to follow up and say, here's where that school money should have gone. And so a lot of the times it just disappeared into other stuff because we have a barely functional government.
Yeah. Well, Alex Preen, glad we figured all that out.
Same, as always.
Yes, always a pleasure. So wait, is this episode that you did on Boris Johnson? It also reminds me too, I just want to say this because this also stuck in my craw. There are some leftists out there that I respect who are against the vaccine mandates. Again, we have no vaccine mandates in this country except for healthcare workers. There's this clip going around of Jeremy Corbyn where ostensibly he's against vaccine mandates. And if you listen to the clip carefully, you will see that his problem with vaccine mandates was basically twofold. One, he didn't see it as practical because the NHS was going to lose a significant portion of its healthcare workers. That was not an issue in this country.
Yeah.
It was almost like a Y2K type of situation. This apocalypse that we thought was going to happen in terms of vaccinations and they would be understaffed. That's not what's causing a strain in our hospitals. It's the fact that you had people, inhibiting any type of COVID protective measures to protect the hospitals. A, and B.
And we have a for-profit healthcare system that makes sure that there's very, very little margin for error.
Slack.
Yeah.
No slack. Mm-hmm. And the other thing was that Corbyn had mentioned was it's better to convince people than force people. And the fact of the matter is we can measure that. And in this country, when the administration said we're going to impose either a test mandate with an exemption for vaccines, it worked.
Yeah.
It worked. It added, it gave us a bump in vaccinations.
Well, and, all this anti-mandate stuff is coming at a time where the West is trying to convince China to drop their zero COVID rules, which kept their rates so low throughout this entire thing that they've actually had a more voluntary vax system than we have. But we're trying to get them to drop that now because we need them to get back in the factories and making stuff for the supply chain.
Exactly.
So that's why this Libertarians, they likes to act like we're the anti-authoritarian one, but really you're just saying what the West is saying to China.
Exactly. So wait. So when?
Our Boris episode will be up next week. You'll be able to see it.
Okay, and folks can check that out. The politics of everything. Alex Perrine, thanks so much for your time. Always a pleasure.
Of course. See you later.